بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسول الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Inshallah, we're now going to make a start on the fourth and final session, which will inshallah take us up to 5:30 and the conclusion of this particular course and the course book. Before we look at the slide which is in front of us, a couple of questions which the sisters have posed. First question was with regards to if, let's say for example, a husband who was to pass away in the middle of a lunar month. Generally speaking, it's 4 lunar months and 10 days. The iddah, the waiting period for a wife whose husband has passed away. But just say for argument's sake, the husband passes away in the middle of a lunar month, say the middle of Muharram, the middle of Safar, middle of Rabiul Awwal, then if that is the case, then we will count 130 days. So it will be 130 days. Okay, so it won't be 4 months and 10 days. It will count 130 days. And if it is at the beginning, because 4 months and 10 days works out to be 130 days, like 30 days per month. But if it's, say for example, the beginning of the month, if the husband passed away, just say the 1st of Muharram, then we count 4 lunar months and 10 days. So just keep that in mind. So that was one of the questions the sisters, one of the sisters have posed. And the second question, again, one of the sisters has posed is, during the observance of iddah, is a woman allowed to go into the garden to hang out washing or even spend time gardening? Now, with regards to hanging out washing, that depends on whether there's somebody else there or not. If there's somebody else there, like say for example, I don't know, the sister or somebody else, or just say she's got a daughter who's kind of old enough, then she should then obviously send the daughter to go and do the hang the washing outside in the garden. No one else is there, then obviously she can do it herself. And with regards to spending time gardening, so the answer is no, because obviously gardening is not like a necessity. It's only if there's a necessity or a dhurura, then she will be allowed to leave. Okay, now let's move on to the slide which is in front of us. This is quite an important slide. Now remember, let me just give a quick recap before we look at this particular slide. Obviously, as I was explaining before, that generally speaking, the law is that a woman, she should observe the iddah and the waiting period in the house she was sharing with, the house she was staying in with her husband. That's one rule I mentioned before, Maghrib Salah. I also mentioned that it is the husband's responsibility to pay for her maintenance, for the bills, for the accommodation, rent, so on and so forth, during her waiting period. So whether it's 3 menstruation cycles, 3 months, whatever, the husband has to pay for it. And I also mentioned that if there is like a necessity, then she will be allowed to leave the house. Now in front of us we have some rules here, because what I've said to you is not actually quite practical in some instances, because I've said that the wife has to stay in the house and observe the iddah in the house where she was staying with or staying in with her husband. But as you know, sometimes that could be a problem. It could be a problem to say if the husband is living with his parents, with the in-laws, if the husband has given his wife divorce, in particular if the wife has kind of like left the house as well, it's not going to be ideal for the wife to come back into the husband's house, because there's always a danger that the husband may be a bit violent, abusive, may say to the wife, oh, you walked out and this is what I'm going to do to you, and so on. So it's not that practical sometimes. I mentioned that it's the husband's responsibility to look after his wife, financially maintain her. But as you know, there is a situation, there could be a situation where the husband doesn't want to maintain his wife. He says, no, why shall I, give her money for? Why shall I, give my hard-earned cash and earnings for this particular woman who 2 months later is going to leave me? So why should I pay for her accommodation? Why should I pay for her rent and her expenses during the waiting period? So, there's a lot of situations like that. It could be so that, I've said just now that the wife, she can't be like, say for example, leaving the house during her waiting and iddah. But just say if the wife is working, so what does she do in that situation? Because it's very easy for us to say, oh, she should quit her job. Yeah, okay, she quits her job, then after a waiting period finishes, who's going to then support her? It's very easy to say, oh, she should quit her job and the husband's going to support her. But remember, the ex-husband is only going to support her until her waiting period finishes. What's going to happen then? When she's by herself, no one's looking after her. So it's not really practical to say, oh, she should quit her job and look for another job after she finishes the waiting period. So what should a sister or a woman do in that particular situation? So what I've done is that looking at it from a more modern day point of view and situations, the slide which we have in front of us is basically what we call the fatwa, and the fatwa is upon this opinion there. Now we're just going to go over some of the paragraphs here. First paragraph right at the top is, if the husband does not want her or his wife in his home, she could observe the waiting period with all its conditions in terms of, as I said, not wearing too much makeup and fancy clothing, in her own rented home or parents' home. In other words, husband has divorced her. So I mentioned the rule is that the wife has to observe the iddah in that home where she stayed at with her husband. But just say if the husband doesn't want her there, I said to her, look, I don't want you around me. I don't want you to be around me, because I'm bitter that you've walked out, I've given you talaq, I don't want to take you back, I don't want you around. So in that situation, if the wife was to observe her iddah, her waiting period, at her rented apartment or rented house, so just say she's gone somewhere and she's renting out a house, so she can observe her iddah there or at her parents' home. So if the wife, say for example, is from another area, another town, another city, she could go to her parents' house and observe the iddah there. That would be allowed. So that's one rule. Rule number 2. However, second paragraph here, if the husband wants her to return and spend the waiting period in his home, she is to return on the condition that she would be safe there. Now if the husband, just say he's also deendar, religious as well, he knows the rule that actually the wife should supposed to spend the iddah and the waiting period here, I should be looking for another accommodation, say for a few months until she finishes a waiting period. So if the husband wants his wife to come and stay at that house, so the rule is that she is to return, i.e. she will have to go back and stay in that particular house on the condition that she would be safe there. As long as she thinks that, okay, he's not going to harm me, he's not using this as a kind of a device to somehow, plot against me and attack me whilst I'm asleep or something, or break into the house and do something bad to me. As long as she honestly feels that actually I'll be safe there, he's not going to do anything, he's religious, he still has some feelings even though the marriage has broken up. In that situation, she should return and observe the iddah there. But then the next part of the paragraph explains that if she honestly fears for her well-being from him in such a situation, she may observe the waiting period with all its conditions in her own rented home. So in other words, if she feels, even though the husband is offering her, oh, come and stay, but if the wife knows the husband, he knows that, no, he's actually very abusive, and he wants me to go there so that he can do something to me, he can attack me and so on. If the wife honestly feels that, then in that situation she doesn't have to go back, but instead she can observe the iddah and the waiting period in her own rented apartment. Similarly, if you look at the third paragraph, he explains that if financial support is not being provided and the husband is not otherwise fulfilling his duty towards her, then it is permissible for her to work to the degree necessary for her to suffice herself for the duration of the waiting period. So So what does that mean? It means that, as I was explaining, that the husband during the waiting period has to provide for his wife, his ex-wife. But the husband is not willing to do so. As already explained, could be a scenario that, why shall I bother, why shall I pay her for, she's going to leave me anyway, so why do I need to, spend, £100, £200 on her where it's going down the drain, she's going to leave. So if the husband is not willing to support his wife during the waiting period, nor does he have the intention to do it, so in that situation, he explains that the wife would be allowed to work, but only that much where it is necessary for her to suffice and survive, you could say. In other words, if she's already working, just say she's already got a job, then she can continue to work, and if she isn't working, then she can actually look for a job, find a job. During the waiting period, she can find a job, but she should only do that many hours, which is basically sufficient for her. So not like a full kind of 9 to 5 job. Obviously, again, if possible, not to do a full day's work, but just if she can do, say, part-time, and that would be sufficient, along with probably government help and so on, and that would be sufficient for her and for her kids if she has any, then she should do that. Or if she is, say, for example, working, she's already got a full-time job, then I think I mentioned at the bottom there that she should again try to work only that much, which is again sufficient for her, and if it's possible, to take her holidays during that period. So just say, for example, as everyone has like 4 weeks around paid holiday, and obviously you can take extra, but you won't get any pay for it. But just say you've got 4 weeks. So just say, for example, the husband has divorced her and she's got 4 weeks holiday for that year left. So she should take it at that particular time, if possible, because obviously then she's getting paid for not working, and she's got the waiting period as well, so she could do it properly as well. So what I'm trying to say is that if she's working full time and she can't quit her job, then she could work the full time, but if it's possible to take the holiday, then take a holiday. If it's possible, say for example, to leave off work early, just say for argument's sake, she can leave, instead of leaving at 5, she can leave at 3 for the next few months. If the boss is very kind and considerate towards her, then she should do that. Basically, because her husband's not supporting her, so she'll have to work, but try to do it in such a way that she doesn't really need to spend the entire day out. If the minimum can be done for the next few months, explain the situation to the boss and say, look, this is the situation, and can I do part-time, say, for the next few months? Or can I do, say, can I leave a bit early? If I leave at 5 o'clock, by the time I catch the bus and come back home, it takes another hour, 1.5 hours, a train, so on and so forth, especially now after it gets dark early. So can I say leave a bit early, 3 o'clock, just before the rush hour, so I could then come home early and then start my iddah early. Okay, so basically in that way, try to do the iddah to the sunnah, or as I mentioned there, as completely as possible. Okay, and then the last point I mentioned, that again, if there is a need for her, like for example, if she's going through a divorce and it's gone kind of messy in terms of courts and these kind of people are involved, and she needs to go and speak to a solicitor, or she needs legal help in terms of she needs to go for a meeting to a solicitor. Generally speaking, they won't be coming to see you, you have to go and see them. So in that situation, she will be allowed to leave, or if there's any other kind of necessities, then she'll be allowed to leave the house, whether it's her husband's house or the rented apartment she's staying in. But it's best that, as I said there, that she does it during the daytime, and in the evening she's at home. As much as possible, the evening time, or when it gets dark, especially during the winter, after 4 she should be at home. If a woman is observing iddah now, if she needs to go for a doctor's appointment, do it during the morning. If she needs to see a solicitor or any other kind of help she needs, like she needs to see one of those job seekers allowance, whatever or benefit she's getting during her iddah waiting period, try to arrange the appointment during the morning time, where obviously should be more safer rather than say during the evening. Okay, so basically this particular slide which we have in front of us, that is more or less what the sister should do she should obviously try to do it at the husband's house. But if the husband is not willing or she fears for her life, then she can do it somewhere else. Similarly, if the husband is not willing to support her, provide for her, or the husband is supporting her, but she needs to continue working, she can't quit the job, because as soon as the waiting period finishes, who's going to look after her? You know, parents, brothers, they may initially say, oh, don't worry, I'll help you out, sister, but you know, they've got their kind of necessities, they've got their children, their wives, and their things to think about. So in that situation, if the wife was to continue working, but as I was saying, if possible, on reduced hours, or you know, taking leaving work early if possible, or taking her holidays at that particular time, if she can do that, then in that particular way, she will be able to, she'll do the iddah and the waiting period to the best of her ability. Okay, now the next section I mentioned there is the prohibition of marriage during iddah. Again, just very quickly, just explains that when a woman is going through her waiting period, so whether her husband has passed away and she's observing the 4 months and 10 days, or whether just very simply husband has given a divorce and talaq and she's going through a waiting period, during that period, no one, obviously she's not allowed to marry, but it is also a sin for someone to offer and to propose to her at that particular time. What they can do, as mentioned in the Quran, is that they can gesture, so they can do ishara and say that, okay, don't worry sister, you know, I'll sort you out after you finish your iddah, something like that, or I'll look after you after you finish your iddah, like those kind of words, and that's okay. Such as, don't actually say, I want to marry you, don't worry, I want to marry you, because that's like in a way you're offering. But if, say for example, a brother who knows of that sister's situation, she's going through a waiting period, obviously women, when they go through the waiting period, there's always that trauma, that what's going to happen to them afterwards. As I was saying, that it's considered to be a very sensitive issue, separation, divorce, a stigma attached to it, that, you know, how can I face people, how can I face my friends? You know, as I was saying, that in our community it's considered to be like a loser if you divorce. So, you know, there's that stigma and trauma attached to it. So if, say for example, somebody knows of a situation and says to her indirectly that, don't worry, I'll look after you, or I'll maintain you, I'll support you after your iddah finishes, and indirectly is offering nikah, then that's okay. But what you're not allowed to do is obviously to actually marry someone, that's totally haram, and also to offer a woman that I want to marry you, do you accept it, during her waiting period, then that is also not allowed and not permissible as well. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next page, page 14, and also the next slide with regards to the consequences of talaq raj'i and also talaq ba'in. Now again, a quick recap of what I explained early on in the day. Is it still on the board? No, it's not on the board. If a husband, I said, gives his wife a clear divorce, says to his wife clearly, I divorce you, so that will give her talaq raj'i. Yeah, very good. Yeah, the consequence is that a talaq raj'i will occur. And if a husband was to give his wife ambiguous or elusive word of talaq or divorce, such as you get out, you get lost, pack your bags and leave, then talaq ba'in occurs, which in English means irrevocable divorce. And what we're going to do on the next couple of slides and also on the next section in your course book is we want to look at the consequences of talaq raj'i and talaq ba'i. I want to explain like what happens, what will be the consequences if a husband gave his wife clear talaq, which results in talaq raj'i. What will now happen to the marriage in terms of if they want to get back together, and also for talaq ba'in as well. Now, if you have a look at the slide which is in front of us, it's mentioned that if the husband gave his wife talaq raj'i, the wife does not become unlawful for the husband. So if the husband gave his wife talaq raj'i, then the wife does not become unlawful and haram for the husband. It then goes on to explain that the husband can take her back if he revokes the divorce before the ending of the 3 menstrual periods, if she still menstruates, or 3 months. Okay, so if the husband says to his wife, you know what, I'm sorry, I apologize, I want to take you back, then that's valid. The wife will then have to go back to the husband. But then I've written there right at the end, the choice of taking the wife back lasts only during the waiting period. At the expiry of this time, the ruju, i.e. the option of taking the wife back, also expires as well. Now, if you brothers and sisters could cast your mind back to an example we looked at probably many hours ago now in the morning, of that December the 1st, December the 6th. So I mentioned that talaq ahsan was husband gave his wife talaq on 10th of December. Then I mentioned then there's 3 menstruation cycles, January, February and March. And when March the 6th passes, then the wife's free, her 3 menstruation cycle has gone and she's now free to get married or do whatever she wants. Now basically what that is telling us, or what this particular paragraph is telling us, is that before March the 6th, if the husband takes his wife back, if the husband revokes the talaq and he says to your wife, you know what, Zainab, I want you to come back, or Aisha, I want you to come back, sorry for what happened earlier, I want you back. So that is an example of revoking the talaq. And what will that mean is that as long as he did it before her waiting period finished, that revoking of the talaq will be correct and valid. Basically, the wife will now have to go back to him, and there's no need, this is the key thing here, there's no need for them to redo the marriage again. They don't have to do a new nikah, they don't have to go in front of the Imam Sahib and get a wali or someone else involved. They could just get back together again without the need, minimum first, in other words, without the need of anyone finding out. Obviously when you go to the Imam Sahib, then the whole community finds out. You don't have to go to any Imam Sahib. Minimum first, if he wants to take her back within the 8th and the waiting period, then that would be allowed and permissible. Okay? Remember, this is only if he has given his wife 1 talaq. Now just say for example, you may be thinking, okay, just say March the 6th passes. Just say March the 6th passed and he didn't take his wife back. And just say end of March, he decides to take his wife back. He decides, you know what, it was a mistake. I want to really get back together again, more for the sake of the kids, say for example. So now the question is that if the husband now, he's only given a 1 talaq and divorce, he wants to take his wife back, but he decides, say, after the 6th of March, after a 3 menstruation cycle finishes. So the answer is that, yeah, he can take her back, but they'll have to redo the marriage again. What I mean by take her back, obviously the wife has to agree as well. Because when March the 6th happens, that's it, they're 2 strangers now. So now if he wants to take her back, then they could get back together again. They'll have to redo the marriage. The wife has to agree to it as well. And as long as the 2 things happen, like the wife agrees and the husband's also happy as well, they'll have to redo the marriage. So what I'm trying to say is that in talaq raj'i, within the waiting period you can take her back. If the waiting period passes or finishes, then you can still take her back, get back together again, but you'll have to redo the marriage and the nikah. Okay. Now the next paragraph, also it's on the course book as well, just explains that how do you take it back. I just mentioned that you should revoke the divorce and you take it back. So how do you take it back? So there's two ways of doing it. Either by speech in terms of husband phones the wife and says, you know what, Zainab or Aisha, I miss you, I want to take you, girl, I want to take you back, or like, you know, something like that, or no, it's my mistake, forgive me, I want to take you back. So either he verbally says it, phones her, tells her, or number two is through actions. He takes her back, but through actions in terms of intercourse, kissing, touching, and so on. So in other words, they meet somewhere. So he's given a talaq or divorce, but somehow they manage to meet somewhere, like either at his home or her home or somewhere private. And what happens is that he doesn't actually say to her, I want to take you back. But what does he do? He kisses her, or they have intercourse. So they have intercourse, kissing, touching, so on and so forth. That is also a way of revoking the divorce and the talaq. Okay, and then they are considered to be, they got back together again. Remember, that is within the waiting period. Obviously, after the waiting period, obviously, if they want to get back together again, it has to be done through a new marriage and a new nikah, with a new set of dowry and mahar and everything. New set of, not new set of, but you need witnesses as well. But this is, remember, if you are going to revoke the divorce and you want to get back together again, within the waiting period, it has to be done through speech. The husband says to the wife that I want to take you back, or it has to be done through actions in terms of, you know, the husband kisses her, touches her with lust or intercourse. Then in that situation, they would be brought back together again. Okay, now the next paragraph, or the next slide as well, and also the next paragraph in the course book, explains if the husband had given his wife a talaq-e-ba'in. So, Rafi, you know, Rafi. Yeah, so what is a talaq-e-ba'in, you reckon, or? So it's a divorce.
Breaks the marriage completely.
Yeah, it's like elusive words. So elusive words. Remember, talaq-e-raj'i was clear words which give talaq-e-raj'i, and talaq-e-ba'in is where there's elusive words such as, you know, you get out, pack your bags and leave. So that gives what we call a talaq-e-ba'in, as I explained in the morning. And what does that mean? It means that the marriage with his wife will break straight away. Yes, so when you say, when a husband, that's why it's a bit more dangerous, this one. When the husband says to his wife, basically, you know, pack your bags and leave. And as I mentioned in the morning, if he intended divorce or talaq, or the situation or the circumstances was such that he intended talaq and divorce, then what will happen is that the marriage will break straight away. Straight away it will break. Forget about iddah waiting period here. Straight away the nikah is broken. But if they want to get back together again, he will have to redo the marriage and redo the nikah. Okay, so even though it may have been given within the iddah, even though the three menstruation cycle, even though the wife didn't go through her waiting period, it doesn't matter. What will happen is that the nikah and the marriage will break straight away. And if they want to get back together again, then they will have to redo the marriage and redo the nikah. Okay, whether it's within the waiting period or whether afterwards, they'll have to redo the nikah and the marriage. Just keep that in mind. I know a lot of brothers, and I think that's what the sister was trying to, the sister who wrote earlier on, I think after Zuhur, on the paper about, you know, why is that the case, I think she was trying to say, it's just like that in talaq-e-raj'i, there's more like a grace period when the husband was like open with his intention. So like as I was saying earlier on, that if you say to the police or to the detective that, look, I intentionally killed this person, I plead guilty, they are more likely to give you a lenient sentence, aren't they? Rather than you saying not guilty and then they find out, no, you were intentionally trying to kill that person. where you'll get a more longer sentence in prison. So exactly when it comes to a similar distinction can be drawn with talaq, that if you clearly said it to your wife, the Sharia is willing to give you a grace period where within the waiting period you can get back together again. There's no need to redo the nikah. Whereas for talaq-e-bain, if you had said it in an elusive, round the bend way, and you did intend divorce on talaq, then the talaq will occur, but the marriage will also break at the same time. So if you want to get back together again, you'll have to redo the marriage and redo the nikah. Okay, everybody understood that? So that is the main difference between the two. Now this then takes us nicely on to the next section about something which is called halala, Arabic word, which means to make something lawful. That's what halala means. And I'm sure it's a term which many of you have heard of. Now, when does this happen? So we mentioned that if a husband gives his wife one divorce, if it's a clear divorce, they could get back together again within the waiting period. If the waiting period finishes, they just redo the nikah. Same also for two divorces, by the way. Husband gives his wife two divorces. Within the waiting period, they can get back together. Waiting period finishes, then they redo their marriage. Similarly with elusive divorces, one elusive divorce, one ambiguous divorce, then they will have to redo the marriage. If there's two ambiguous divorces, again, they'll have to redo the marriage, whether within the waiting period or afterwards. The problem is, this next scenario here, is where a husband gives his wife 3 talaqs. Husband gives his wife 3 divorces, whether 3 clear divorces in terms of husband says to his wife, I give you talaq, like very clearly, or whether 3 ambiguous or elusive divorces in terms of our husband says to his wife 3 times, or in 3 different scenarios, pack your bags, pack your bags, pack your bags. The reason I said 3 different scenarios is when he said the first pack your bags, and if he intended talaq, then the marriage breaks, so you can't implement another ambiguous or talaq-e-bain. So over 3 periods, just say he said to his wife, pack your bags, whatever, or he gave her elusive divorces. So basically, a wife has been divorced 3 times. Now, if you just have a look at the first paragraph, it says here that when a woman is divorced 3 times, the husband cannot take her back unless she marries another man first. That's what halala means. If the husband has given his wife 3 divorces, so when her waiting period finishes, if he wants to take her back, he can't. The rule is that this woman, i.e. your ex-wife now, would have to marry another man, and not only that, not just only marry, but would have to marry another man, obviously sleep with him, have intercourse with him, and then afterwards, if he, the second husband says, okay, let me divorce her and so on, only then she will be allowed to remarry the first husband who gave her 3 divorces initially. So what I'm trying to say in a nutshell is, if a husband has given his wife 3 talaqs, if he wants to get back together again, he can't unless she marries somebody else. Now, somebody may be thinking, that's so harsh and so on. It's harsh because it's at the same time, it's a kind of like a penalty on the husband, or a kind of like a thought on the husband that he should be very careful before he gives talaq to his wife. Because remember, husbands have the right to talaq, don't they? So the Sharia has also reminded them that, look guys, if you give your wife 3 talaqs, remember, just have that thing in your mind that you won't be able to get back together again unless your wife marries another man, and not only that, he sleeps with her, has intercourse with her, thereafterwards she will be able to come back to you. Now, any right-sane or right-thinking man, generally speaking, or husband, would not want his wife to marry another man, would they? So it's that thought there which should be over the husband's head that, look, I know Allah has given me the right of divorce, but I should be very careful when I use that right in it. Because if I just give a 3 in 1 go and then I realize, you know what a silly mistake I made, then I need to then go over the brunt of me knowing that my wife then has married another man, slept with him, and then she's come back to me again. So it's because of that thought. So in a way, it's a kind of like a reprimand from the Sharia that, you know, why do you do that for? Does that make sense? It's like a deterrent in a way, you could say. Like in the Islamic State, if a man and a woman who are married, they commit zina, they commit adultery, they are stoned to death. So it's like a deterrent so that they don't commit zina or adultery. Again, in the Islamic State, if a man steals, woman steals, their hands are cut up to the wrist. So again, it's a deterrent that they don't steal. And that's why you see that in Islamic states in particular, there's very little, there may be 1 or 2, very little when it comes to stealing, and very little or low percent when it comes to adultery. Whereas those countries which don't have these rules, like the Western countries, we see adultery is rife, and we also see stealing is also common as well. Thieving, robbery is also very common as well. And not only that, unfortunately, we see that because adultery is so common nowadays, and fornication is so rife, that as mentioned in the hadith of Sunan ibn Majah, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that when adultery becomes common, plagues and diseases will also become common as well. What does that mean? It's telling us that 70, 80, 100 years ago, you know, diseases such as AIDS, HIV, gonorrhea, never ever heard of them. You know, did anybody hear of these diseases? No. But recently, these kind of diseases, gonorrhea, I think one called syphilis, and AIDS, HIV, are so common. Why? Because adultery has become common. So look how Prophet ﷺ prophesied, when adultery becomes common, diseases will also become common as well. So 100 years ago, even in non-Muslim families, you know, they were also similar as well, that husband and wife, when they get married, you never heard the husband cheating, wife cheating, you know, till death do us apart, as they say. They never would think about another man or a woman. But that's become common also in Muslim families, unfortunately. Men are committing zina, adultery. So what's happened is that these kind of sexual diseases have also been spread as well. So as I was saying, that it's like a deterrent. That's why we have strict rules when it comes to adultery. That we have strict rules when it comes to adultery. We have strict rules when it comes to thieving and stealing. Similarly, to act as a deterrent, Sharia has given the rights of talaq and divorce to the husband, but he has to use it in a good way, not like take advantage, because he should always think of that or have that in his mind that, look, if I was to do that, then this is what will happen. You know, my wife will then go to somebody else, and so on. That's why I mentioned the second point there, that it should be borne in mind that it is not a solution provided by the Sharia. A lot of people think that halala is a solution to get out. It's like a lot of husbands think, or wives think, okay, it doesn't matter, I've given my wife 3 divorces, she'll just sleep with another man and then she'll come back to me. It's not a solution. This rule here, by the way, is if by chance, if the wife decides to marry somebody else, and I think I mentioned this in the handout as well in the course book, if she marries somebody else and the husband, and the second husband then, after consummating the marriage, decides to divorce her, and then she by chance wants to get back to the first husband, then halala works. And then you have the concept of halala. Unfortunately, what you have nowadays is that Auzubillah, may Allah forbid, that you have people who are offering halal service. You have some men, they offer halal service. Auzubillah. So same way you have like brothels and so on, where men go and commit zina and adultery and bad things. Similarly, you have what we call halal service, where some men they offer that kind of service. That they'll ask around, does your wife need a halala or something? Does a wife need halala? And I'll provide the halala for her. So that is something which is haram and lawful. That's why if you look at the third point there on the on the presentation, the hadith, this is found in Tirmizi, in Sunan Abu Dawud as well, narrated by Abdullah bin Mas'ud al-Anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has cursed the muhil, the one who makes halal, and the muhallal lahu, for the one it is made halala. In other words, the man who does this halala, and also the woman as well, and also the husband, the ex-husband for who this woman is being made halal for, all of them are cursed by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what I'm trying to say is that these kind of halala services, which some men, nauzubillah, provide, is also not allowed and is also not permissible as well. But I've also mentioned at the bottom there that according to the Hanafi fiqh, if a woman does enter into marriage with another man on the condition made verbally that he divorces her after consummating the marriage, is valid but severely disliked because of the aforementioned hadith. The woman will be free to marry the first husband. Okay, so very clearly saying that, just say, and again it happens a lot, that a woman should get married to another man. Her ex-husband has given her 3 divorces, so the wife wants to get back together with the ex-husband. The ex-husband wants to get back together as well, but he's given her 3 divorces. So what will happen? That particular woman would then get married to another man. He will get married to another man on the condition that, okay, I will get married, consummate the marriage, spend the night with you, divorce you, and then after you finish your waiting period, you can then get back to your first husband. So even if that condition was made, it says that the marriage will be done, so what they did will be okay, but it's severely disliked, makruh tahribi, for them to do that. But if she now wants to get back to her first husband, then that would be allowed, but it's severely disliked. Okay, so that's what this particular rule is explaining. Okay, now the next section and also the next part of this slide talks about decree nisi and decree absolute, which I'm not going to go over, as Maulana Habibullah Sahib mentioned earlier. But what I'm going to go over is the scenarios, which is what it says in your course book. Let us look at the issues in light of the sacred law. So which is still on page 15, but in the middle, and I've got the scenarios there on the presentation as well. Now, I think Maulana Sam must have just explained how decree nisi and decree absolute works. I'm just going to explain how that impacts on the Islamic Sharia law, or how it impacts on fiqh, the Fiqh of Talaaq, how it impacts in that particular situation. Now the first scenario is that he explains, I've got it written there on the course book as well, that if a man files a petition for divorce in the county court and demands separation, then in this, as the man has the right to divorce, he can use it or make someone else his representative. And in a nutshell, what this first point is explaining is the husband, obviously they've got an Islamic marriage and they've also got the marriage legally contracted according to the law of this country, yeah? Now the husband, he wants a divorce, he wants to separate from his wife, but he doesn't want to do it Islamically. Wallah, I don't know why he doesn't want to do it Islamically, but I know he wants it more official. So what does he do? The husband, instead of saying talaq to his wife, instead of speaking to an imam or a mufti or a scholar, what happens is that the husband, he goes to the local courts and he says to them that, or he says to them I want to divorce my wife. And they start the proceedings of decree nisi, and then 6 weeks later the decree absolute. Now in that situation, I kind of mentioned there, but obviously a bit more in detail, that talaq will occur, divorce will occur. Okay, because remember, the husband, he has the right of divorce, doesn't he? The husband, he's got the exclusive right to divorce his wife. So now when he's gone to a county court, when he's gone to a judge and he's made what we call offers there, he's made statements there that he wants to get married, sorry, he wants to divorce her. So what's he done, in other words, is that he's made the judge a kind of representative, we say in Arabic wakil, a representative, that I want you to divorce my wife. Yeah? And remember, a representative or a wakil doesn't have to be a Muslim, it can even be a non-Muslim as well. So obviously judge most likely going to be a non-Muslim, isn't he? So now when he says to the judge or the representative that I want you to divorce my wife, then that is valid, that is accepted. And obviously the judge will then do the decree nisi, the decree absolute, and talaq will occur. So that's a valid talaq. Similarly, the second scenario is that if the woman files for a divorce and the court case begins, then the man gives permission to the judge to proceed in clear terms, then in this case also the divorce will take place. So the second scenario could be, what I mean divorce take place, I'm talking divorce according to Islamically here, by the way. What Maulana Sahib explained earlier, that's according to the UK law. I'm just trying to show that, see how it then impacts on the Islamic law. So the second situation could be where a woman, she files for a divorce, she goes to court herself, she says, oh, I want a separation from my husband. So the judge, he writes to the husband reads it, he looks at it, thinks, yeah, you know what, yeah, I want a separation as well. He signs it, or he gives the judge permission to proceed and to go ahead with the cancelling of the marriage. So again, in this case, he explains that the divorce will also take place as well. So the talaq will happen Islamically. The next rule goes on to explain, this is the next bullet point. If the woman files for a divorce and the judge sends the divorce petition to the husband, but the husband defends his case and is not willing to divorce her, but despite this, the judge issues a divorce. So what's happened here? Woman files for a divorce. The judge sends the proceedings to the husband. The husband defends his case, like in other words, you know, he doesn't want to give his wife divorce. He's kind of arguing back and he's saying, no, what she said is lying. I didn't abuse her, I didn't hit her. She's just making it up. So the husband's defending himself. But despite that, the judge issues a divorce. Yeah, you know, because obviously they'll look at it in another way. They issue a divorce and say, okay, no, it's broken. Your marriage is broken. Okay, understood that? Also, let's have a look at the next bullet point. We'll look at these three scenarios, then I'll mention the rule at the bottom. The man receives the divorce petition but does not proceed with the case, nor does he do anything to show his willingness to divorce her. But the judge issues a divorce. Another scenario could be that, again, judge has written to the husband, but the husband has no intention at all to divorce his wife. He doesn't want to give talaq to his wife. Even though they're separate, he doesn't want to divorce her. He just like ignores all the letters which come, he just like takes it, puts it into the bin or shreds it or something. Basically, he doesn't like have no willingness to divorce or to engage in any kind of dialogue. So he explains that in that situation, if the judge issues a divorce, what will then happen? We'll come back to it later. And the third scenario is that the woman files for divorce, the judge sends the divorce petition to the husband, but he refuses to defend his case and is not willing to divorce her. Despite this, the judge issues a divorce. Okay? Now in all these situations, in the above three cases, according to the Islamic law, the husband and wife are still considered to be married. Yeah. The woman cannot marry another man. If she does, the marriage will be void and both will be considered living in sin. Does that make sense, everyone? The slide I mentioned earlier was basically there was some willingness from the husband's part. Either he went to the court directly himself and said, can you, start proceeding to divorce the wife? Or like the wife may have started it, but he acknowledged it, he agreed with it. These three scenarios here is basically either the woman starting it off, but he's not responding, he's not engaging in any dialogue, he's not willing to divorce his wife. So in all that situation, it's mentioned there that the husband and a wife would still be considered married. Okay, so even if the judge stamps and says talaq, divorce has happened, no, not Islamically. If the wife initiates it and the husband doesn't say anything, doesn't respond to it, doesn't sign the letters, doesn't acknowledge it, doesn't get involved in any dialogue, doesn't even defend his case, then in that situation it's mentioned that the husband and wife would still be considered married Islamically. The woman cannot marry another man. If she does, the marriage will be void and both will be considered living in sin, living in guna. Okay? So that is the rule in a nutshell. Okay. Now this then takes me on to the next slide here. It's also mentioned there as well in the course book on page 16 now. Let's now go back to the earlier scenario where the husband kind of has applied for a divorce. Okay, he's gone for the divorce, or the wife may have initiated it, but the husband, say for example, has acknowledged it. So now what's happened is that, when the judge gives a decree nisi, I'm not sure whether Monasab explains, it's more like a Latin word, it's like a Latin word which means unless, which means decree unless the respondent responds back to the letter. So the court has issued a decree nisi. So as I mentioned then, it's also in the course book as well, that divorce doesn't occur. So when the decree nisi is given by the judge, by the county court, there is no talaq at that time, there is no divorce at that time. But then he goes on to say, however, from the date the decree absolute is granted, an Islamic divorce will occur and the woman's iddah will also start. But 6 weeks later, when the decree absolute starts, 6 weeks later when the decree absolute is given, again Maulana must have explained what is decree absolute. That's when a divorce will occur, Islamic divorce will occur, and the woman's waiting period will start. Then that leads to the question that what type of divorce will occur. So as I mentioned there also in the course book as well, the answer depends on what kind of words the judge used to dissolve the marriage. I.e., what kind of words did he kind of like write down and then which you signed. If he used words such as I have thereby granted a divorce, then one talaq al-raj'i will occur. Yeah, because remember, divorce is what? Clear words, isn't it? So with clear words, talaq al-raj'i will occur. And I just explained 25 minutes ago that in talaq al-raj'i, if the husband now wants to get back together again within a waiting period, then he can do so. If the waiting period passes, then they could still get back together again, but they'll have to redo the marriage. But obviously, if the judge used words like separation or dissolve, such as I thereby dissolve the marriage. So as you know, dissolve or separation gives are elusive words which give the meaning of talaq. Bind, very good. So which will mean that the nikah has broken straight away. If they want to get back together again, then they can, but they just have to redo the marriage within the waiting period or after the waiting period. Okay, we got 1 or 2 sections left. Inshallah, we'll finish before the 5:30 bell. Okay, the next section is about custody of children. Now again, I'm not going to go into too detail here because I think Mona Sab kind of mentioned it. Did he mention things about rights of children? Yep. Did he?
Don't think he went into that.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll do, yeah, okay. Okay. All right, what I'm going to mention now, obviously, in the course book and also in the presentation which we have here, is obviously from an Islamic perspective of custody of children. Okay, that how it all works and so on. Now, it's mentioned that firstly custody is given to the mother. So when let's say if there is a breakup of the marriage between the husband and wife, then custody is firstly given to the mother. And then I've written there that the right of custody will be taken away from the mother if she leaves Islam. So if the mother leaves the fold of Islam, which could be possible, or indulges in sins such as adultery and there is a fear of the child being affected, or the mother kind of indulges in immoral things where it doesn't have to be adultery, it could be something like she started taking drugs or alcohol, or it could be, say for example, other men are regularly visiting her house. It doesn't have to be adultery, it could be just like randomly coming and she's staying out late all the time, and child is going to be affected in that situation. So thereafter it's mentioned, thereafter the custody will be given to the following people. Again, this is all Islamically looking at here. So he says maternal grandmother, paternal grandmother, thereafterwards full sisters. Full sisters meaning that if that child has, say, an elder sister, so she has an elder sister, or maternal half sister, all these people, thereafterwards it will be given to the male relative of the child. What I mean by maternal grandmother, it means that if the maternal grandmother isn't there, all right, or she has also left the fold of Islam, or she's also indulging in things which is going to affect the child, then we'll move on to paternal grandmother. And again the same thing here as well, that if she is indulging in open sinning, or like she leaves the fold of Islam, then it goes to full sisters. So it kind of goes down in one after the other, depending who's alive, who's available, and also whether they are not doing the aforementioned unlawful things. Then he goes on to say that if this list has been looked at and they're all either not there, not available, or they're all, say for example, indulging in sin, then it will be given to the male relatives of the child. Yeah, which is father will look after it, grandfather, real brother, paternal brother, maternal brother. So they'll all look after the child. Everybody following so far? So they will all look after it. Now if you could just add this rule on, I forgot to mention this here, is, do you know the custody of children which I've just listed there for a boy or a girl? For a boy, this list is applicable up to the age of 7. So for a boy, this list, i.e. mother, grandmother, so on and so forth, we look after, is applicable all the way up to the age of 7. And after the age of 7, automatically the boy will go to his father. Automatically will go to his father. Until he reaches the age of puberty, at which time he will be given a choice. At which time he will be given a choice of whether he wants to stay with the mother or whether he wants to stay with the father. So up to the boy up to the age of 7 will then automatically go to the father. Then he will remain with the father until the age of puberty, at which time he will be given a choice of staying with the father or staying with the mother. If it's a girl, so again, same scenario when she's born, just say there's a talaq and divorce between the parents. Same rule also applies there as well. Mother, maternal grandmother, paternal grandmother, so on and so forth. All the way up to the age she reaches puberty. Okay, so this rule here, this list is until the time when she reaches puberty. And at that time when she reaches the age of puberty, she will be given to her father until he decides to get her married. At which time obviously she'll go to her husband's house. So if it's for a girl, she will remain obviously with her mother, maternal grandmother. This list will apply all the way up to the age of puberty. At that time, she will then go to her father and she will stay with her father all the way up to her marriage and her nikah. Okay, and we've got a couple of more pages left, inshallah. It's been a long day, but inshallah we're just nearly there. Okay, the next section is establishing paternity of a child. Or, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that when a child is born, then the lineage of this child, who would it be attributed to? So I mentioned there that when a wife gives birth to a child, it is automatically attributed to the husband. So when a mother, she gives birth to a child, a wife, she gives birth to a child, automatically that child would be considered to belonging to that woman's husband. Okay? So that woman's husband would be the father of this child. It then goes on to say, I've also written there as well, this will also be the case even if the wife, may Allah forbid, cheated on her husband and had a child from another man. So even though everybody knows, even though the husband knows that this child is not mine, he knows that. DNA even says that this child is not mine. You could tell that this child is not his. But, she committed zina, she fell pregnant, and then she gives birth to a child, and husband knows, everyone knows, DNA is proving that this child is not the husband's. That child now would still be attributed to the husband of this woman. Okay, so that's how we, remember, establish paternity of a child. Okay, everyone see that so far? It's because of a hadith, al-waladu lil-firash, because of that particular hadith, automatically the child is attributed to the husband of the wife. If this woman has a husband, automatically he will be the father, even though I said everybody knows that. That's not his child, even then it will be attributed to the father. Then he goes on to say, however, if a Muslim woman gives birth to a child out of wedlock, or in other words, she's not married, and she has a relationship with a man outside marriage, and they have fornication, they have intercourse, she falls pregnant, she gives birth to a child. So it's mentioned there that that child would not be attributed to the father, but instead will be attributed to the mother. Remember, this is only when she's single, she doesn't have a husband, so she's obviously committed zina with or adultery with another man. She's not in the marriage, she's not married or anything, a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, you could say. She falls pregnant, so the rule is that that child now will be attributed to the mother and not to the father anymore. Remember, if she was married and she committed, say, adultery with another man and she falls pregnant, then obviously that child will be attributed to her husband even though we know that it's not his, but the Sharia says it will be attributed, the lineage of the child will be attributed to the husband. But where it's outside marriage, in terms of they're not married, this woman has a kind of relationship with another man, with another person, she falls pregnant, then in that situation the child will not be attributed to the father, but it will be attributed to the mother instead. Okay, then the next slide explains the hadith, because the Prophet of Allah ﷺ said the child is attributed to the one whose bed it is born. And this hadith can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim. In other words, whoever the father is, the child is attributed to him. But then I've gone on to explain that in adoption, however, the lineage of the adopted child does not become established with the adopted parents. The child should not be attributed except to the natural parents and not to those who have adopted him or her. And this is quite important. Just say, for argument's sake, a couple, they adopt a child, they don't have children themselves, so they adopt a child. So remember, when you adopt a child, that child now is not considered to be your own child. It's not considered to be your own. Even to the extent that if it's a girl you adopted, even though she was a baby, you adopted her, but when she reaches the age of puberty, the man now will have to do parda and hijab from that girl. Because that girl who you have adopted is not your own child. If it's a boy you have adopted, when he reaches the age of puberty, then when he reaches the age of puberty, then he will have to now do parda, or your wife will now have to do hijab and parda from him. So what I'm trying to say is that when you adopt a child, they are not considered to be your real child. So obviously you get sawab, don't get me wrong, you get sawab and reward for looking after them, but they are not considered to be your real child. Hence, when they reach the age of puberty, you have to do parda from them. If it's a girl you've adopted, if it's a boy you've adopted, your wife will then have to do parda from him. The only way around it is, say for example, if it's a young boy or girl you adopted, before she reaches the age of 2, if your wife was to breastfeed her, then the rules of fosterage will apply. We call it in Arabic rada'a, and in that situation, then obviously they would be now considered to be your foster son, foster daughter. Hence, there's no need for you to do hijab and parda amongst each other anymore. Okay, so that is the only way around it. Like, if you adopt a young boy or a young girl before the age of 2, if your wife was to breastfeed them, so they would now be considered as not your real again, but they're considered as more like a foster son, foster daughter. So obviously you could get away with regards to the hijab and the parda. But if you hadn't, then in that situation you have to, when they reach the age of puberty, do parda and hijab from them. Okay, the next 2 points very quickly. I'm not going to go over in detail each one of them. It's all there in the handouts and also in the course book as well. But just to like kind of highlight the situation. The reason I mention this is, again, sometimes husbands, they do say this, so it's important for husbands to know that the consequences, and also for wives and sisters on the other side to know the consequences as well, because the next section is something what we call in Arabic ila, okay, ila, which basically means that somebody takes an oath that he will not have intercourse with his wife. Now, sometimes a husband, he may get frustrated, like he wanted to have intercourse with his wife, say tonight, and the wife saying no, you know, like, and the husband got a bit frustrated and he said, oh, you know what, I'm never going to have intercourse with you again. So now if he was to use an oath, like say, wallah, you know, by Allah, I'm never going to have intercourse with you again. So what is the situation? So I mentioned the situations there that either, everybody could just have a look at their course book, that no time limit was fixed, or a time limit of 4 months was fixed. He said to his wife, I'm not going to have intercourse with you for 4 months. Or a time limit of more than 4 months was fixed. or a time limit of less than 4 months was fixed. Okay, so he explains that the first 3 situations are termed in Sharia as ila. Okay, so if he said, I'm not going to have intercourse with you ever, or I'm not going to have intercourse with you for 4 months or 6 months, whatever, it's considered to be ila. And it explains that if the oath taker breaks his oath within 4 months and resumes intercourse with his wife, he will have to compensate by a kafara, an expiation for his oath, while his nikah remains intact. Does that make sense? So just say he said to his wife, I'm not going to have intercourse with you ever. But after a week he then has intercourse with her. So what will happen is that because he made an oath that by Allah I'm not going to have intercourse with you, he will have to give her expiation for that oath. He will have to give kafara for that particular oath. But his marriage will remain intact. And he then goes on to say that however, if 4 months did expire and the oath taker did not break his oath, a talaq ba'in will occur. A talaq ba'in will occur. So if he was actually quite adamant and he said to his wife, I'm not going to have intercourse with you ever, and actually 4 months did pass, then one talaq ba'in occurs. Okay, one talaq ba'in occurs. They can get back together again, but if a new marriage or if a new nikah is done. Okay, so I said this sometimes happens, like husbands, they do say this, they get angry with their wives and say, oh, you know what, wallahi, I'm not going to have intercourse with you. You know, they sometimes say that. But again, as I said, you know, this course was to like tackle these kind of misconceptions or incorrect beliefs. You know, husbands, they don't realize that when they say, wallah, I'm not going to have intercourse with you, the consequences, it kind of can apply. So if 4 months did pass and they didn't say, for example, have intercourse with their wives, then you know, one talaq ba'in will occur. But obviously regarding the 4th situation, where a time limit of less than 4 months, if the oath is broken, kafara will have to be given, and if the oath is completed, the marriage will remain valid. Or in other words, if they said, I'm not going to have intercourse with you for 2 weeks, and within 2 weeks he has intercourse with her, then he'll have to give a kafara expiation. If 2 weeks did pass and he didn't have intercourse, then marriage will be intact. He doesn't have to give a kafara or an expiation for breaking the oath. And then the next part I've just explained, you know, what is the kafara for breaking an oath, which goes from the bottom of page 17 to the beginning of page 18. And just lastly, the last section, again, I'm not going to go into too detail, is something which is very old, a kind of like custom of the Arabs, which is called zihar. And what is zihar? Zihar is basically where the husbands, when they would get into a disagreement with their wives, they would say that you are for me like the back of my mother. Okay, that it's like they would say this, that you are like the back of my mother. Now basically, just to go into a bit more detail, I think I've explained it there. What zihar means is that you kind of make a comparison of your wife to a part, to something which is haram, to a part of your mother or your sister which is haram for you to look at. Now remember, your mother, sister, you could look at their face, you could look at their arms, that's okay. But their private parts you can't look at, or their back you can't look at. So if somebody was to say to his wife, you are like the back of my mother, you are like, nauzubillah, the private parts of my mother. What's he trying to say or imply is that the same way my mother is unlawful and haram, you are haram. The same way my mother is haram, you are haram. The same way for me to look at my mother's private parts, that is haram, you are haram. Anti alayya ka faraji ummi ka dhahri ummi. Like the back of my mother, like the private parts of my mother. Okay, so that is called zihar. If somebody said, this is where a lot of people get mixed up. If somebody just said, oh, do you know what, you remind me of my mother, that's okay, because he's not saying anything haram there isn't. He just say his wife does something that he said, you know what, you remind me of my mother. Or he says here that, you know, your hair, it reminds me of my mother. That's okay, because he's not trying to say you are like my mother's hair or my mother's back. If he's just saying, reminiscing something of his mother, and he says, oh, my mother's hair is like your hair, something like that, he just makes a comment like that, or my mother's face is like your face, or my mother's beauty, like it's like your beauty, yeah, compliment, yeah, good. If it's more like compliment rather than trying to make something haram, then that's okay. There's no zihar there. And I've mentioned in the course handbook as well. Okay, so what happens if somebody does do zihar with his wife? So we explained that he will have to give a kafara. So it's not like a talaq or a divorce occurs, but he will have to give an expiation. Yeah, we'll have to give an expiation before he could resume intercourse, or before he could resume intimacy with his wife. And the expiation is similar to the expiation, if you look at the next page now, page 19, of breaking a fast. When you break a fast intentionally in the month of Ramadan, the expiation you have to give, it's similar for zihar as well. In terms of one would have to feed, fast for 60 days consecutively. If you have a look at page 19, fast for 60 days consecutively. Or if that is not possible, then obviously he can feed 60 poor people to their fill for 1 day, or a poor person for 60 days, or give basically 60 people sadaqah or charity. So that is basically the way around it. It's not like ila where 4 months passes, there's a talaq, there's an automatic talaq or divorce. What's happened here is that after, when he said that to his wife, they can obviously get back together again, but he'll have to give a kafara expiation, and that expiation again as a deterrent to teach him a lesson that, why did he say that for? Okay. Inshallah, that concludes the Fiqh of Talaaq course. Before we finish, just obviously just personally from myself, just like to thank the brothers and sisters for obviously spending some time and coming for the Fiqh of Talaaq course. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I hope everybody understood from it. If any brothers have any questions, inshallah I'll be here for a bit, so you could ask me anything personally, even sisters as well. I'll be here, so if you want to ask me anything, either you could write it in and put it through the barrier, or you could ask me personally if you want. So that's one. And also I'd like to thank the brothers, the brothers, the volunteer brothers, for giving me the opportunity to convey the message of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's a very important topic, so I'd like to thank the volunteer brothers, Brother Tufail, Brother Shahni. I'm going to say Shami. Yes, and also Mona Habibullah Sahab, also the sisters there as well, for obviously setting up this course, because to tell the truth, the easiest part is actually delivering it. The hardest part is actually the logistics, setting up the lunch and everything. Okay.
Enjoyed it.
So I hope everybody enjoyed it, inshallah. I've got my email address there. I'll type in my number, and I'll leave it to Brother Tufail to do the closing ceremony.
Jazakallah khairan. Alhamdulillah, we'd like to send our sincere thanks to Mufti Sab to dedicating a day and also doing all the work behind it as well. Just before sisters go, again, I know I've been mentioning it all day, just because obviously we haven't got if you can make sure your name, mobile number and email address is on the registration forms, please. I know